So you're looking at my title, and I'm sure you're thinking, aha, clickbait. But in actuality, I am going to try to define Donald Trump as a progressive, albeit a special form of progressive, one we haven't seen in a while. This is a type of progressivism that's essentially tempered with anti-neoliberal populism. So, how on earth do I paint Donald Trump with the progressive paintbrush? Well, first, we have to look at uh, his stated plans, his past actions, president, his existing platform, and even the dreaded Project 2025 to look at how you frame what he's going to do. And for the most part, if we look at American social programs, the goal of all of these is not to alter any of them dramatically, despite what you may have seen in any really badly sourced graphics. Project 2025 doesn't mention Social Security except in the most fleeting way. Trump's platform says we're not going to touch it. So, not altering the existing system uh, doesn't allow him to fit into any of the other isms we've been talking about in the previous videos. The American system of welfare like programs may have some similarities to National Socialism, fascism, but are definitely not as a goal to meet the idea of total socialism anywhere. And to be more clear, one of the things with Trump that's always hard to pin down is I don't think he holds an overt philosophy. Any philosophy he holds is essentially accident of his lifespan, the things he's picked up along the way. So it tends to be a hodgepodge. So it would actually make very much sense, since we live in a progressive system with a progressive establishment, with a progressive education system, that he would soak in a lot of those progressive ideas. However, as primarily uh, in his businessman mode, he was a domestic businessman primarily. He wouldn't be as steeped in the globalism, the internationalism, or what I like to call the neoliberalism. So even if we look at the dreaded Project 2025, we really don't see much in the way of what we'd call conservatism. I mean, at best, it's conservatism light. It's tweaking around the edges of the existing system. Hardly revolutionary, hardly national socialist, hardly fascistic. Uh, the only philosophy that matches pretty much doing what you can to maintain the system. Now, you could take a perverse is probably the wrong word, uh, a more dictionary definition of conservatism and say they are attempting to conserve the programs as they are or make them functional so they last longer. But I doubt any American would accept that as a definition of conservatism. Even I think it's too far out to try to force that idea on people. Some of the other things we see in Trumpian ideals is the idea of a strong military. Uh, a strong military fits into the progressive mindset. However, at the same time, he at least talks about the idea of the military drawing back at least somewhat to continental defense rather than global defense. That is not neoliberal. We also see that Trump has essentially what I call a view of Constitution light, whereas he seems to like the Constitution in the form that it provides structure and stability, but he definitely isn't in any way an originalist or a verbatim reader of it or a literalist in any way. He seems to have the progressive mindset that as long as the Constitution is being beneficial to the program, the Constitution is good. So we see Trump backing free speech, but also you hear him from time to time talk about strengthening the libel laws. We see him touting the Second Amendment as much as he understands it, which I don't actually think is well. But at the same time, he could say yes and put a bump stock ban in place. And under him, the ATF did run a little bit amok. So I believe he has a progressive view of the Constitution is the Constitution is great as long as it's helping with the program. Uh, Trump seems to be at peace with the idea of deficit spending, although he may have come around to the idea of maybe there's a little bit too much. And how money is used and deficit spending, et cetera, is really a progressive trait. The idea of binding the monetary system to something other than the Federal Reserve is to take it out of government control. In the Federal Reserve, you've actually created essentially one of the legs of the establishment, and the establishment is firmly control of the money supply. I don't see him altering that in any meaningful way. I said he may come up with some spending plan that is more beneficial to the population of the United States, and that's the populism coming in. But at the same time, I don't see him becoming a absolute deficit hawk or really being horribly concerned about paying down the debt in any meaningful way. So these are progressive traits, definitely not conservative. And so what we see probably more strongly in the Trump mindset from what we've seen in the past and what he's saying now is there are stronger anti-globalist traits and anti-neoliberal traits, essentially against progressive globalism. Now, I don't believe this is a full out retreat from globalism, but I think it is something that we're looking at in terms of a fairly major restructuring of the neoliberal order. The security structure of the world is going to change, and the United States is going to have a less of a part of it. From a populist standpoint, without the United States being so spread out, the security apparatus isn't going to cost nearly as much because we're going to be relying on partners to do a lot of the work. So, if we can take him at his word, one of his goals is ending the war in Ukraine, whereas the neoliberal order essentially wants to break Russia. Uh, if you're still looking at being the neoliberal order and a global hegemon, it's critical that Russia be broken as a functional nationality. In a post neoliberal order, uh, call it empire light perhaps, Russia still has a huge part to play. It can be a partner, not necessarily an ally, but somebody you can make bilateral agreements with and work out issues for that area of the world. Another thing that fits into Trump's rhetoric that is very much counter neoliberal is treating China as a rival rather than a country destined to join the neoliberal order. I think a lot of the neoliberals are still hung up on the idea that somehow China is going to come around, whereas Trump basically is looking at restructuring the security apparatus of the US's order in order to contain China and wear it down. I don't think he's looking for confrontation. It's more of a new Cold War, and let's call it Cold War Light. Uh, what we saw during his presidency, and all indications are he would continue that, is that he's in favor of bilateral trade over global trade. So, whereas the neoliberals, the globalists, would want to submerge the United States into various global organizations and global trade pacts, uh, Trump would basically set up agreements from the United States to individual countries to try to come up with deals that are specifically geared for the two countries rather than the world as a whole. We also see the idea of shifting collective responsibility for defense to local blocs. Uh, he's interested in a diminished role in NATO, where NATO does more of the heavy lifting. He is interested in peace in Korea because if South Korea is less of a client and more of a leader, we don't need to provide as much military support over there. And also in the way of the Abraham Accords, the idea of an Arab-Israeli defense bloc to counter other agents in the region. Whereas the neoliberal order is a lot more interested in seeing things like uh, Korea, the Korean situation as it is. They want to see the United States as the leader of NATO, and they essentially don't want to see a bloc in the Middle East unless it's completely subverted to the neoliberal order. Also, we see in terms of the Trump agenda is something different than open immigration. Part of the globalist order is that they have realized for some time that demographically, the United States and Europe are incapable of maintaining the populations that allow the neoliberal order to exist, and also doesn't allow for the welfare states of those countries to exist either. So rather than come up with a methodology to entice the population to fill the gap, whereas we essentially growing population is required for all these things to happen, their idea is to import a population because they don't particularly care whether nationality gets damaged in the process. In fact, a benefit. Whereas in the Trump view of things, nationalism tempered is a functional entity and is essentially a good in the West. So therefore, he would be seeking something different than open immigration. What different is, we don't yet know. So, in the comments below, have I completely lost my mind calling Trump a progressive? And do keep in mind, I am strongly delineating the difference between good old American progressives and neoliberal progressives, i.e., globalists versus nationalists. Uh, for a true American progressive, nationalism was not a bad thing. Also, there's nothing that says a little bit of populism mixed into progressivism causes progressivism to go away. It could be an amalgam that works somehow. Uh, think of the earliest versions of progressivism when the establishment still understood that the population was a critical player in success of how everything ran, opposite to how I think a lot of them look at it now. All right. And if you don't buy into my definition of Trump being a progressive, tell me what he really is. And if you come up with National Socialist, Fascist, or Conservative, please look at my previous videos where I debunk these ideas or at least put big holes in them. Please smash the like button. If the YouTube algorithms brought you here and you're not a regular subscriber, please check out my other titles. I'm sure you'll find a lot of things that are of interest to you. Consider subscribing. And also, if you know someone who might find this interesting, please share it with them. Thank you for spending time with me this evening. Hope to see you again in a future video.